Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 17 of an ongoing series focusing on application deployment in Configuration Manager, current branch, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Today's discussion focuses on the install application integration that was introduced in 1906 of Configuration Manager current branch, and we'll learn all about it as we roll forward. So our agenda for the discussion is here. What is this thing that we're calling install application and why do we care about it? Then going to want to dig into the details about it, look at the requirements, talk about some scenarios where this might be interesting, see how it works, and then finally the fun part, actually go configure this and watch it in action. So what is install applications? Well, already mentioned, it was introduced in 1906. This is an optional feature that you would need to add. But when you do, what this does is it gives you the ability to do real-time application installation, as close to real-time as you can get, right? And the way this works, and you'll see this more as we go along, this works solely and completely across the high-speed notification channel. There is absolutely no client policy involved with making this work, right? That's why it works so quickly. And there are a couple of places where you can trigger this in the console. In fact, collection is incorrect. I should not have put that up there, so ignore that. But device is where you can actually go and trigger the install application to take place. So yeah, forget the collection entry. It's just purely on the device where you can right click and trigger install application. You'll see that in a minute. Now, why do we care about it? Well, already mentioned, real-time install is something that might be interesting in certain scenarios. Right? If there's a scenario where you need to do rapid deployment for some reason, then this is an option to help you in those situations where you need to do something very, very quickly. And other reasons too, right, that we can talk through, but those are the ones that come to mind. In terms of requirements, there are a few. First, you need to have Config Manager 1906, not only the site server, but the client as well. You do need an application at least deployed in the manner to work with this particular mechanism of deploying applications. What that means is your target for your deployment needs to be a device collection. The deployment itself must be set as available, right? There is an option under the when you set to available, there's an option that shows up called an administrator must approve a request for this application on the device. If you don't set it to available, you won't see that option as something you can do. So if you set to required, that option isn't visible at all. And then finally, you need the content replicated. So I noticed my closing apostrophe should be up here, but it's down here. Nevertheless, right? The content for the application needs to be replicated so that it can be pulled when you trigger the install application, the content needs to already be in place across the environment so that the application can install, right? Now, the inference of that, which I'll go ahead and say, even though we're deploying as available, when that application arrives on the device, it's going to install immediately, right? So available doesn't really mean that it's an available option. It will be installed as a required application immediately. Available is just a way that you configure the deployment to get it into the scenario to be able to be delivered using the install application option. And then finally, scenarios. So what scenarios could be thought up or applied to where this would be interesting? Well, there's a few, and you can have your own scenarios. Help desk maybe. If there's a user out there that needs an application and it was supposed to get there, it's not there, whatever, then perhaps the help desk could use a mechanism such as this to cause that application to be deployed. Field technicians, same kind of thing. If there's a particular application that you don't want to put out to a great number of devices, but you do want it to be available for those specific scenarios where the install is approved, then targeting those specific installs, or another way of saying that is maybe manage the exceptions to the rule. So maybe most devices should have a certain build, but in certain cases, additional applications might need to be installed. So this is one way to do that. I've even talked with customers who are creating a pretty impressive workflow with Orchestrator to basically have a web front end where users can ask for an application, and then through an Orchestrator workflow, it will go into Config Manager and trigger the install application for them, kind of real time. Right? So kind of interesting. And again, you can think of scenarios of your own that could be interesting here. In terms of how this works, right? So at the base of all of this, we have an application that we want to deploy. Any type of application that you want, you can deploy this way. And you're going to deploy that application to a collection of devices. You're going to set the rule or set the deployment as available, which will expose the rule that you need to click, called an administrator must approve a request to install the application. And when you do that and hit OK, nothing will happen, right? There's no policy that goes to the client at all. Nothing. It just essentially parks the deployment, and the deployment serves as a definition for when you later install this application. So at some point later, then an administrator or someone that has access to the console to do this is going to go into the device and trigger the install application action. What's going to happen there is across the high-speed notification channel, we're going to notify this device that there is now an application to install. You'll see it in Software Center. It will immediately begin to install, right? And then as a part of this, we're going to also create an entry in the application request section, basically an application approval that is automatically approved, right? You'll see it in the console. You'll see that here in a minute. So all of that together is what enables this particular capability. Okay, now, how does this all work? How do we go about configuring all of this? So let's get into the fun part and see all of this work. So let me pull in my Config Manager site server and take a look. Launch the console. Thought I had that open already. Launch the console, kind of walk through what we have. The first thing we need to do is we need to have an application created that we're going to deploy in the manner that I discussed. So here is an application. I've got 4. I could do this with any of them, right? But the rich copy application is the one that I've actually deployed. So let me show you what I mean. I've got a deployment there. I'm going to go trigger another deployment. And so the first thing I'm going to do is choose a collection. This needs to be a device collection. Okay. So I'm just going to choose one that, again, I've already got it deployed. I don't care, just to move on through the wizard. Here, automatically distribute content for dependencies. Not a bad idea. So if this application has dependencies, we're going to need to be able to install those and find the content for those whenever the application runs. So if there are dependencies, going ahead and deploying those is a good idea. Specifying where the content is. So in this case, it's already been deployed. And to call out, we want the content on distribution points before we trigger this. Now, you may have distribution points, you may have a caching solution, whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that this content is available to the client and the client can find it when you do a deployment like this, right? And then the next piece is how are we going to deploy it? Available. So here's that option I was referring to. An administrator must approve a request for the application on the device. Notice if I change that to required, that option disappears, not even there, right? Now from here, the deployment is standard. There's nothing else about it that I need to do. So I'm just going to exit and not worry about my changes. I already have my deployment here set up the way that I want it. So no problem. So here, all of the options are in place. Content is where it needs to be, and so on. right? Again, the other thing about content, just make sure that you're configured with the right boundaries, boundary groups, caching solution, whatever you're using to make sure the client has availability to download that content whenever it tries to run the application, right? And then this goes without saying, but I'll say it, right? We're targeting the deployment to a collection. Make sure that collection includes the devices all that you would want to run this task against, right? So if it doesn't, it's not going to work the way that you want, okay? So that's the work that we need to do to get things set up and ready to go. So now let's actually see this in action, right? So I'm going to pull back in the site server, and here I have a test client that I'm going to log into right here. All right, and I'm going to bring up Software Center in just a minute. Sorry, I thought I had this already up and running, but let's go ahead and bring up Software Center. Here it is. And the key is that Software Center is empty. There's nothing here. Right now, it doesn't have to be empty, but the point is it doesn't have anything related to the application that I'm going to deploy. And so you see it's blank, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this off to the side. I'll also just show you real quick before we do this that rich copy is not on this machine, right? So let's go into Programs and Features. And in fact, you see rich copy is not here. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this and then pull this system off to the side, and I'll come back to it as quickly as I can here in just a minute. So in order to trigger this, I'm going to go to Assets and Compliance. And notice I had collection on the previous screen. I need to take that off. I'd forgotten to remove it. But if I go to a collection, any collection, and just right click, I would expect to see Install Application on this menu. That's where I'm going to trigger it. It is not a collection based capability right now, maybe in the future, but right now, and this is a 2002 lab environment, it's not. If I go to my devices though, and this is the device that I'm using for testing, and right click on it, here's where I see my Install Application option. And so I'm going to check that. Now, the only applications that are going to show up here are those that are deployed in the manner that I described, right? And so I'm going to, as quickly as I can, go ahead and hit OK, and then pull my other machine for testing back in here. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to pull my other machine back in here, and we'll wait for it and see what happens. Hopefully, we'll get the application here pretty quickly. So we'll just pause for a minute. And I'm not having to refresh Software Center at all to get this done, but there it shows up, right? And so this application showed up, high-speed notification channel, no policy involved at all. You see that it is in the process of installing. So even though it's configured as available, it is automatically triggered when it arrives on the machine to actually install. So if we look at our device, we see, in fact, rich copy is here. Well, now another thing about this is this particular application does have an uninstall command. I recommend every application you deploy have an uninstall command, right? There's limitations that you'll have to deal with in the event that it does not. Because this has an uninstall command, let's go look at something. So I mentioned that when you actually trigger this, what happens is under Software Library, it's going to create a pre-approved application request. And in fact, here it is, right? Now, if I go and later deny this request, then it will remove the application. So let's go back to my client machine and watch what happens. So give it a minute. And what should happen here, maybe even as I'm speaking, there we go, is that the application, since I denied it, triggered itself to uninstall. Now rich copy is gone from the machine, right? And so I have total control over that high-speed channel to do what I want to do. So rich copy is totally gone, right? And that is how, and if I update here, I'll see that this may go back normal without a problem, but I've always lost my patience and updated, and you see it's no longer available in Software Center. And that's what you would expect. That's what you would want to happen and it'd be expected to happen. So we pull these two away, right? So again, very simple concept, not difficult to demo, but has significant capabilities that might be interesting in certain scenarios. All right. Now, in terms of troubleshooting this thing, it's very much the same as any kind of application install. The one thing to understand, though, is the way the client learns about the application install is through the high-speed notification channel. And so on the server, there's a couple of things I'll just show you real quick. The server, there's a log called BGB server. And if I look in this, I can trace the activities related to actually sending information to clients. So here's where I did the uninstall. So sending push task. Here's the push ID, the task ID, the task GUID, right? All of this. So all of this doesn't really help us in the logs. It would if we saw an error somehow, but it doesn't really help us track exactly what's going on, especially if you have a lot of things happening with the high-speed notification channel. But it does give us enough details that if we need to, we can track it down. And so what I'm going to do just very, very briefly, and again, anytime I do this, it's more of a look, don't touch kind of thing, more for education. If I pop open SQL Server Management Studio, there are some tables related to the high-speed notification channel that will give us some details. I'll show them to you. I'm not going to go into the details about them really at all because living in the database is not something you should do without being advised by Microsoft support, right? But I'll show you where these things are as soon as Management Studio opens up here. All right, so I'm going to log into it, and then we will go and open up our database. As soon as I can, here's databases, open up our database, and then there's tables, right? And so there's views and things you can do too, but I'll just stick with the tables. There are the BGB tables. So BGB is basically the shortcut. It stands for big green button, but these are all the BGB tables that you can use to sniff out the details, the task template, any kind of other things. And then there's another set of tables called client operation, right? That in some cases you'll want to get involved in. Let me keep scrolling down here and we'll see the client operation tables come up. So here they are, right? So those are tables that are in the database that store the detail related to the high-speed notification channel. Like I said, I'm not going to go any further, but just that. But I will show you on the client the corresponding table or corresponding log, if you will, for seeing that the high-speed notification was actually received. So if I go into the client and look under logs, those are my setup logs here, CCM logs, then I will see the CCM notification agent, CCM notification agent, and very similar to what you see at the site server, it will record doing heartbeats back to the site, getting configurations. You'll see the same GUID information in here at some point. Let me just search for it. Task. Let's do a task up, and hopefully we'll hit some. Maybe not. Let's see, GUID. See if we have the GUID. That might just be a server one. That might not be. Okay, so let's see push. Well, so I'm striking out here. Let me find an entry real quick. And as soon as I go to the very bottom, which is where I should have started, here is the stuff. So I just was searching up instead of searching down. But these are the ones actually triggering the actions on the client. So here's push ID 46, which should have been the uninstall, push ID 45, which should have been the install of rich copy on the client, right? Okay. So troubleshooting, very much the same for applications installed this way in terms of the application, all the associated logs, the key one being app_enforce.log. The notification channel is the focus for actually seeing the notification get to the client instead of the traditional policy logs. And then one tip that I'll give you, and we will be done here, is this. So whenever I was discussing this with a customer, one of the questions that came up is, hey, what happens when the client is offline? Will that offline client receive this application whenever it comes online? And so my initial thought was no, because the high-speed notification channel expects the client to be online. It will warn you, in fact, when the client is not online. But when I tested it, the answer is yes, it actually does. So I had a client that was totally powered off, and I went ahead and sent the notification to that client that was totally powered off and then turned it on. And it took a couple of minutes extra, but sure enough, that application popped right in. So the only reason I can think of that would be the case is because of the application request node that is populated whenever we trigger the request. And so the client goes and checks in, sees it, and then is able to go ahead and get the application. So thought that was cool. Anyway, so not, again, a difficult feature, a very powerful feature for certain scenarios. So wanted to show it to you. Again, not a long session, but I think an impactful one. So we will wrap the discussion here, and we will see you to talk about task sequencing in session 18 coming up. Have a good day, and we will talk to you next time.